Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. In February 1975, 9-year-old Marcia Trimble left her house in Nashville to deliver Girl Scout cookies in the neighborhood. She never returned. After a massive but fruitless search, her body was discovered on Easter Sunday. Outrage and horror gripped the community of Nashville, but the murder investigation was frustrated at every turn. The case went cold for 3 decades until it was finally solved. In January 1997, Herbert Blitzstein was found murdered in the living room of his Las Vegas townhouse. A notorious mob insider, Fat Herbie, had pursued loan sharking and other rackets for decades. Now, Blitzstein had been dispatched gangland style by 3 bullets to the back of the head in what appeared to be a classic contract killing. But the details of who killed him and why turned out to be much more complicated, and the real motives and circumstances remain murky to this day. These are just 2 examples of the riveting stories assembled by best-selling criminologist R.Barri in this unparalleled collection of some of the top true crime writers in the world. There are 17 contributors, including Amanda Lamb, Burl Barer, R.Barri Flowers, Kathy Scott, Patricia Springer, Harold Schechter, and Catherine Ramsland. Spanning murder cases from the beginning of the 20th century to today, masters of true crime, chilling stories and murder and the macabre, edited by R.Barri Flowers. The book we're going to be featuring this evening is Masters of True Crime, edited by my special guest, R.Barri Flowers, journalist and best-selling author. Welcome back to the program, R.Barri Flowers.
Hello, Dan. I'm very happy to be here with you this evening.
Well, it's always good. You've always got a twisted and bizarre tale for our audience. So, in this, you've assembled a crack team of some of the best-selling authors and some of the biggest names in true crime for the past 20 or 30 years. Maybe if you could indulge us, tell us who the 17, as I mentioned, alluded to in the synopsis, who are the 17 authors that are contributors to Masters of True Crime?
Okay, well, these are very talented and best-selling, award-winning group of authors, including Harold Schechter, Catherine Ramsland, Burl Barer, Carol Ann Davis, Kathy Scott, Robert Scott, Patricia Springer, Linda Rosencrantz, Robert J. Watkins, Amanda Lamb, Michelle McPhee, Camille Kimball, Lee Laughlin, Phyllis Goebel, Douglas Jones, and Laura James.
And did you mention Burl Barer?
I sure did. Yes, definitely.
There you go.
Barer, Edgar Winnie.
Can't get enough of Burl Barer.
Yes.
Yeah. No, so that's a great team. Now, most of those names are familiar to people, especially for this audience.
Yes.
They've been reading true crime for a long time, and whether you just woke up from a coma, you will recognize most of those names. And for anybody listening to the program as well, as they may have noticed, there's probably 6 or 8 of those authors that are in your book have appeared on this program too. So very, very good guests and willing to talk about their books and the particular cases they were involved in. Now, you're the editor, and you also are a contributor in this as well, aren't you?
That's right.
Now, what was sort of the? I know it's criteria. Obviously, you say, okay, I have a wish list of some really great authors that I'd like to assemble for this. But what was your general idea? What was the theme that you were putting together? Masters of True Crime, Chilling Tales of Stories of Murder and the Macabre. What was the theme that you wanted to adhere to, at least, thematically here? What was the theme to this book for yourself, in your initial idea?
Yes, the theme basically was to try to assemble the very best true crime writers that I could in the world. I wanted to find writers who were not only bestsellers, but writers whom I respected and had left their mark on the genre. And so I set about the task of tracking down writers who fit that criteria. Some of them I already knew as friends, and others I had admired over the years, and we were finally able to become friends through my contacting them and their being gracious enough to agree to participate in this anthology.
So you didn't really you knew that, okay, they're all good true crime writers, and for those people that may not know, a lot of these writers have not shied away. There are writers that will shy away from certain subject matter, yourself not included, in terms of yourself and we'll say that Harold Schechter has written about serial killers, and Catherine Ramsland, who's written about serial killers, and Burl Barer has written about serial killers. So there's a lot of the authors that we'll say that not only have written quite a few true crime books, but also have never shied away from the more bizarre and the more graphic story. Would that be true?
Yes, it would be. I also was hoping to find some range with these particular writers. In other words, I wasn't looking specifically for those who have written about serial killers, but I wanted those who have written about historical true crime, for example, and contemporary true crime abroad, as well as true crime tales in the United States. Mainly I wanted the cases that they talked about to be gripping, something that could hold the readers and also offered a very interesting tale that needed to be told.
Now, for those that are listening, this is obviously, if we have 17 authors, we do not have a typical 300-page book from each author put together. So tell us, is this considered true short stories? Tell us what you would call this collection.
Well, I would call this collection 17 True Stories. All of them are true. They really happened, and they're just more or less condensed versions of true crime books. You'd be surprised just how much punch can be packed into a short story. If you're talented enough,
Absolutely.
You can have a beginning, middle, and end, and have it just as exciting as a book. In this case, you have 17 different stories in one book, and all, going in different directions as far as the circumstances, the killers, the investigation, the motives involved, and the outcome.
Now, the historical crime. Why? What year are we talking about? The expanse, the range from in terms of time. You said there's some examples of historical crime. Give us, for example, one of these stories concerning historical crime in Masters of True Crime, and tell us why you picked this, and tell us a little bit about the story itself.
Okay. Well, a great example is Harold Schechter's story. Harold is the Dean of Historical True Crime Writing, Professor of American Literature. His tale takes place in April of 1936. That's the earliest story in the collection. It's about the rape and murder of a writer named Nancy Titterton in New York City. It caused quite a media frenzy at the time, and Schechter does a wonderful job in giving you a great sense of time and place. And so that's one perfect example of historical crime by one of the best true crime writers, historically speaking.
Yeah, he's most well known, or one of the last things he's known for, is the A to Z of serial killers.
Right, A to Z Encyclopedia of Serial Killers.
Exactly. Now, tell us about another example of historical crime and why you picked this next story, and what this story is, a little bit about this story.
Okay. Well, Catherine Ramsland, well-respected forensic psychologist, does a superb historical piece about Italian female serial killer Leonardo Caninciusi, who murdered 3 women between 1939 and 1940 before dismembering them and turning the victims into soap.
Yeah.
That may seem a bit bizarre, but she was able to do this by chopping up bodies and adding perfume, and some of the people that were the recipients of the soap were not the wiser.
Wow.
As despicable as that was. But it was a very interesting case and a perfect example of how female serial killers, though rare, relatively speaking, they are out there, and when they're bad, they can be really bad.
Right, yes, absolutely. Diabolical, in fact. Yes. Now, tell us about Burl Bare's story. People who have listened to the program, Burl has been on numerous times, has his own program on Outlaw Radio, True Crimes Uncensored, and, of course, is now on Hart Fisher's American Horrors with True Crimes, reunited with his original host, Don. So tell us what Burl Bare contributed to this book, Masters of True Crime.
Okay. Burl Bare is really a terrific writer, and I've been on his show before, Outlaw Radio show, and he's written a fascinating true crime story about a mail bomb in Alaska in September of 1991 that killed a 44-year-old named David Kerr and seriously injured his wife, Michelle. The case involved a lot of different pieces of the puzzle, including a U.S. Postal Inspection Service investigation, and it had a host of bizarre and shady characters as this case reached its gripping conclusion. So it's a really interesting tale. I'm sure readers will hang on every word right from the start as a mail bomb goes off and causes death and destruction. In fact, if I can play off that particular theme for a moment, I wanted to comment briefly on the movie theater massacre in Aurora last week.
Right.
Sure that touched everyone. Such a despicable act by this alleged gunman. And then, of course, that brings most of us back to the Columbine mass murder, also in Colorado in April 1999. Well, what most people are probably unaware of is that there was an equally horrific case of mass murder that also occurred in Colorado way back in November of 1955. I've written an ebook, an audio book, on this case called Mass Murder in the Sky, the bombing of Flight 629. Anyway, a United Airlines flight exploded over Denver that year, and as dynamite was planted aboard by a guy named Jack Gilbert Graham. He actually planted the dynamite in his own mother's luggage and caused this explosion that killed everyone aboard, 44 people in all, including the crew and passengers. And so it seems like what goes around comes around. You tend to think that mass murderers and serial killers are modern-day phenomenons when, in fact, a lot of these things just continue to recycle.
Certainly, yeah. Now, you are the editor of this now. Some people might not know, and maybe I'm not fully aware of exactly what your role was in all of this, other than writing one of the stories yourself and assembling these authors. What did editing entail specifically for this book itself?
Well, editing really entailed the entire process, which was first to sell the concept to a publisher as the editor, and then I had to assemble the writers, and I had to gently guide them into what they should write about. You know, we talked about it with each. I talked about it with each of them to get some ideas on what they thought they might like to write about, and then I had to literally edit their stories. Some of them came in raw, and go back and forth with them on that to make sure everyone was satisfied, including the publisher. And so it's quite a challenge, really, to be an editor of a collection where you got different personalities, and you have to keep everyone together and on time, keep the project on schedule. But it was more than worthwhile, and all the contributors were true professionals, and they all wrote marvelous stories that I think really makes this a must-have anthology.
Now, what did Amanda Lamb write about? She's been a guest a couple times on the program. What did Amanda Lamb contribute to Masters of True Crime?
Amanda wrote a very interesting piece on the murder of a troubled 18-year-old named Matt Silliman in Wake County, North Carolina, in November of 2008. It was fueled by jealousy and a love triangle involving other teenagers. So she took on the teen murder, and
right.
So it was a very interesting and suspenseful piece by Amanda Lamb.
Now we have Robert Scott and Kathy Scott for people that I don't think they're related at all, but Kathy Scott's been on the program. I'm hoping to get Robert Scott. He keeps saying he's coming on at some point. Tell us first about Robert Scott. He's a well-known true crime writer. Again, one of the guys that really gets some real graphic stories, some heavy stories. Tell us about Robert Scott and his story that he contributed to your book.
Okay. Yes, Robert is a veteran crime writer that's a friend of mine, and he revisited the haunting and mysterious case of 3 people brutally murdered in the remote town of Keddie, California, in a rented cabin number 28 in April 1981. This sort of has almost become folklore over the years. This particular case is one of those type that really sticks with you over the years. The victims were knifed, bludgeoned, and strangled, and it was really a terrible situation, as one could imagine, and the case still continues to affect people today when talking about it.
Well, Yeah, as many of these cases really do. You see authors write about things that are 30 years old, and they do say that the community is still affected significantly by some of these people, and it's no wonder. It's no wonder.
Yes.
Sure.
In fact, my own story contribution to this anthology is very interesting in and of itself. It's about a serial killer named Donald Miller, who happened to have graduated from my own alma mater, Michigan State University, with a degree in criminal justice in the 1970s.
Wow.
Before becoming a stone cold killer. So his case really hit home for me because he was doing his thing, murdering, sexually assaulting young women around the MSU campus, including his ex-fiancée. So that was scary to think that someone that graduated with a degree in criminal justice, which I have degrees in criminal justice as well, would turn to the dark side rather than be a positive contributor to law enforcement and criminal justice.
Well, we do know that some of these people, these psychopathic killers, are actually just as fascinated, albeit in a much different way, to the same things that you might or I might be fascinated with as well. They're gravitating towards this very interesting subject that they have as well.
True.
Criminology.
Yes. In fact, often you will see a lot of killers when arrested. They've got books on criminal psychology and serial killers and other true crime books in their homes. So clearly a lot of them are fascinated in a perverse way with crime and violence and killers.
Well, they're not much different than some of us as well, but in a much different side of the coin. Now, with this Donald Miller, I was interested because I've heard this before with you that now you were in school to be a criminologist at the same time that Donald Miller was on his reign, his campaign of terror. Is that it? And if that was it.
I was a freshman when he first began doing this, and I was vaguely aware of it, to be honest with you, at the time. It was only a little after I had gone into graduate school that I began to hone in on this case and realized just how despicable it was and just how many people had been killed by this guy. And so it was kind of eerie to think that I could have crossed paths with him at one time or another on campus and never been the wiser to it as he was going around handpicking his victims for murder.
What is the name of the title of your story?
The title of my story is Terror in East Lansing, the Michigan State University serial killer.
Ah, okay. Now, this I'm not so familiar with Douglas Jones. Tell us a little bit about Douglas Jones and the story that he contributed to the book.
Okay. Douglas Jones is a lawyer and an accomplished litigator. He wrote an absorbing story about the escape from Fort Pillow Prison in Tennessee of Ronald Freeman and James Clegg on February the 18th, 1984. And upon their escape, they went on to murder a man named Paul Windrow and terrorize his wife, Elizabeth. Came to their house, even though the prison authorities and other law enforcement had thoroughly searched the area and given the coast as clear to this family, making them feel that they, could let down their guard. But unfortunately, the two escaped convicts had hidden in a hole in the ground and were able to stay there for 2 or 3 days till the coast was clear. and then they broke into this house and murdered the husband and threatened to kill the wife on more than one occasion. Fortunately, she was able to survive this ordeal, but justice, it still took a while for justice to be served fully for this horrific crime, and it's another indication of how prisons are there to hold prisoners, but some prisoners can still find a way out, and if they're violent prisoners, they can cause a lot of trouble from the outside, and this is an example in which they did just that and cost someone his life unnecessarily.
Sure.
But it does happen. The prison system is certainly one that makes it difficult for most prisoners to escape. But every now and then they find a way out and just have to deal with it and hope that the authorities can catch them sooner than later before something like that happens.
Well, that's everybody's familiar with, and especially Kevin Sullivan would be familiar with this, the Ted Bundy case, escaped twice and
yes.
continued
right.
Well, at least once continued the mayhem, but did escape twice successfully. Now tell us a little bit about Michelle McPhee and her story. I know that she has done some historical crime, if I'm not mistaken. So tell us about what story she brought to the project.
Well, Michelle McPhee is an investigative reporter in Boston, and she did a very interesting story on a boxer named Joey Torres, who went to prison for murder in 1979 after killing his manager in Los Angeles. He was released years later due to a technicality and went on to become an informant in a federal undercover investigation into boxing corruption, organized crime. So this was a really absorbing tale that Michelle put together because it touched upon the boxing and some of the things that are going on that may not be as well known by people who are just, most people just tend to watch boxing matches and not think about some of the things that may be going on illegally behind the scenes. And so she touches upon that and does a good job, and I think that readers will find this tale interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Behind the scenes of what really goes on in that world. We've seen a couple movies, but this story really brings that home. Now, here's an author that I've seen the name, but I'm not that familiar with her career. And tell us about Carol Ann Davis and what she brought to the project.
Okay, well, Carol is a Scottish true crime writer. She's done some very good books. Women Who Kill is one of them. She writes a really chilling tale about British arsonist and serial killer Peter Dinsdale, who was only 12 years old when he claimed his first victim during the early 1970s. Dinsdale was responsible for the deaths of at least 15 people as a result of arson. He claimed early on, and pretty much stuck with this, that the fires were started at random because he loved setting fires but hadn't meant to kill anyone. But, of course, that didn't hold up in the court of law.
Right.
But he was actually initially charged with 26 deaths, but 11 of them were eventually determined to have been caused by accident. So he got off the hook there, but it still left 15 people dead, and Carol Ann Davis does a great job in telling this story. One of the youngest serial killers around when he was perpetrating his crimes, Peter Dinsdale. And interestingly enough, when Dinsdale was on trial, another British serial killer, Peter Sutcliffe, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, was arrested around that time. So it gave the British public two very different types of killers to absorb.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Now tell us a little bit about Kathy Scott and the story that she contributed to this book.
Okay. Kathy, journalist and blogger, wrote an intriguing account of the Las Vegas murder of former mob enforcer Herbert Blitzstein in January 1997. His death, though tied to the mob, there was little dispute there, but the circumstances of his death and exactly who killed him was harder to come by because of plea bargains and potential suspects changing their stories this way or that. So Kathy does a good job of telling the story and letting you draw your own conclusions on some of the facts of his life and times and death.
Yeah, she always has. Yeah, she always has the inside track on mob stories that people haven't heard about, and gains this incredible access to. So I'm sure she's done again.
Yes, she did a great job on one book called "Murder of a Mafia Daughter."
Yes, but we had her on the program. We talked about that great book. Now tell us about Pat Springer and what she brought to the project.
Okay. Patricia Springer, a newspaper reporter, wrote about the shocking murder of Victoria Lozano in Denton, Texas, in July of 2002. She was found dead at her house, and her husband, a police detective, phoned in the crime, and then there was a investigation, and the culprit will surprise a lot of people, I think, and then others will perhaps not be so surprised, and given the fact that in this day and age there's really little that can surprise us that much, because so many of these crimes happens with all range of perpetrators that we tend to almost become numb to surprise anymore.
Sure, absolutely. Now, what was the? I mentioned Kathy Scott, Patricia Springer. These people have been on the program. Now, another regular guest on the program is Linda Rosenkrantz. Can you tell us what story she brought to the collection?
Yes. Linda, an investigative reporter in Boston, wrote about the murder of a nurse named Patricia Wysock in April of 2002. Her body was removed from a pickup truck in the chilly waters of the Guilford Lake in New York. That was a shocking crime when it occurred, and the culprit will also stun people in some respects, and others will perhaps be able to pick out the culprit just because in this day and age, I think true crime readers are perhaps more astute in being able to put the pieces together once they have clues and direction.
Oh, sure.
You can make a calculated guess and be right on the money. But they'll definitely be engaged in coming to that conclusion, if in fact they do.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about Laura James and what she brought to this project.
Okay, Laura James is a true crime historian. She's also a lawyer. She wrote a very fascinating tale on Russian Countess Maria Tarnsnovska, who was arrested in Venice in 1907. Actually, that's our oldest case that's been studied, written about. She was put on trial for orchestrating the murder of one of her lovers, Maria, and achieved international notoriety as a result of this case. She was attractive and sex appeal, and she fit the image you might have of a lovely countess, and unfortunately she used that to her advantage in a negative way, and as a result someone was killed. But it's a very interesting story, and Laura does a terrific job of taking us back in time and telling us the story of the Countess and the surroundings, her life, and the circumstances of the day that helped to set up this crime and the aftermath.
Is she still operate the blog Clues, CLEWS?
Well, that she does operate it, but she's been a little lax lately in terms of keeping up-to-date information on it. But as far as I'm aware, she still has the site, and as a matter of fact, now that she's contributed to this anthology, she's indicated to me that that's the inspiration for her to get back with it and bring the Clues, her literary blog, back up to date.
Well, that's great. That'd be good. Every little bit helps.
Yes.
Now, another author that has appeared on the program, and another true crime guy, Ronald J. Watkins, appears in your book, Masters of True Crime. Tell us a little bit about Ronald J. Watkins and the story he contributed to this collection.
Okay, Ronald Watkins is a veteran true crime author. He's been around for a while, and he's written about the murder of 55-year-old wealthy socialite Jean Torre in her Phoenix, Arizona estate back on April the 1st, 1998. And then there were numerous suspects as to who killed her. She was a widow, and it was one of those cases of wealth, greed, and hunger for having what she had, and just the desire to commit violence. She was the victim of really a brutal crime. I mean, every murder is terrible, but some are worse than others as far as the method used to perpetrate the crime. And so hers was not a death that was easy to swallow. And thorough investigation was finally able to cut through the suspects and nail the true culprit of this crime.
Well, that's good. Now, Can you tell us about Lee Laughlin? Again, this is an author unfortunately I'm not very familiar with at all, Lee Laughlin. And what story did this author contribute to the collection?
Well, Lee Laughlin is a former police detective and an expert on police procedure. He's also the founder of the Writers Police Academy, annual conference that brings together writers and experts in various facets of police work. He's written a tale about the mass murder of a family by a killer named James Rupert in Hamilton, Ohio, and then the brutal murder 20 years later of a young woman named Tina Mott that occurred on the very same street as the prior mass murder. So Laughlin does a great job in telling two stories in one and linking them together so that it almost makes the street itself seem haunted. But of course, killers, they're the true ones that are haunted by their willingness to commit crimes of that fatalities, whether this time or previous time. They have to, the onus is always on the killers to not do what they do. And but some of them still let rage or hatred or greed or jealousy or revenge get the better of them, and they do things that ultimately they're going to have to pay the price for one way or the other.
Well, then there are those, as many people listen to the program, and you can attest to as well, that are just, there is no logical explanation, not rage, not jealousy, not revenge. It's evil. There are, certainly, you would agree, certain people are just evil.
Yes, I would say that, and certainly this case in Aurora, Colorado, suggests that. It doesn't seem like he had a specific, the alleged killer doesn't seem like he had a specific motivation other than to commit this mass murder and have the impact it did by doing it during the showing of this particular movie and making a statement that he knows will be on all the news outlets and everyone will be talking about it. That's the true motive, I believe, for mass killers of that type. But it still speaks of evil, the willingness to do this and, irrespective of the consequences for themselves.
Well, they're proud of it. It's an achievement for some of these people. It's now, I guess, one of these people has led another person to do it, and so we have the Luca Magnotta, we have this guy at a Batman premiere shortly after. We have people. It's sort of a domino effect where one person is these twisted people who have nothing going on in their lives, or they, delusions of grandeur. But regardless, they're going to go out in a blaze of glory. They're going to get their infamy any way they can. So they really are. It's a narcissism gone amok, really. It's sure there could be motivation that a lawyer comes up with later, that this happened in his childhood, that happened, and now in hindsight we think this could have happened and this might have been an effect. But in reality, the person knew what they were going to do, and they knew why they were going to do it. It's just to be famous, just to have that 15 minutes of fame. It's incredible,
yes.
Phenomenal, really.
That is true, and that is, really despicable, really, that we have people with this mindset. And since the accessibility of firearms is there for anyone who wants them, legal or otherwise, that makes it that much scarier. In his case,
sure.
Of course, he legally purchased his weapons, so you can't really look at the fact that he didn't have illegal weapons that they could point toward, and as far as gun laws are concerned, but it's tough when you have individuals like that who stay above the law enough over the years that they can purchase guns, as many as they want legally, and then decide to turn deviant. And so that's almost an impossible scenario to stop in our society.
Yes.
I mentioned those who, of course, are able to get guns illegally that can still do the same things. And then you've got so many soft targets like movie theaters and shopping malls and restaurants that, I just hope that we don't have more of these types of things and those types of venues that can do a lot of damage before the culprit is stopped.
Well, absolutely, and in a place like Canada, we have strict gun laws, but criminals don't listen to those laws, and they attain illegal weapons and use it on the victim. So it's a big debate on. Well, I've heard already, posted comments that somebody would have had a gun in the theater, then they could have shot this guy who was shooting people. But we all know what that kind of can lead to next time. Or if everybody's packing guns, packing heat in a movie theater, it is a really sad commentary on society. You got to bring a gun to a movie theater.
Right. Yes, that would be very scary. I don't see that as being the answer at all.
No.
No. People could, there's any number of reasons why they may end up shooting someone accidentally or deliberately, or this isn't the old Wild Wild West anymore, even though sometimes it seems like it out there. But
it is, there is a phenomena, Barry, that I'm very interested in the Luca Magnotta case, just because the case that I was involved with had this celebrity-obsessed psychopath, and then shortly after, we had the Mark Twitchell case in Edmonton, where a filmmaker lured someone and filmed the luring and killed this person for the experience and to enhance his filmmaking. So he's another artist, and the killer I was involved with, fancied himself as an artist, and they reveled in their murders and their fantasies and the killing itself. Then we have Luca Magnotta, almost seems like he's influenced by those people that got press, and he's influenced by all of those people that got press. And he was mailing the body parts of the politicians and killed the victim online and videotaped it and posted it. So we're getting this, as you know, the 70s was some kind of golden age of serial killers, your Bundys and your BTKs, all these people in the 70s and 80s that. But the thing is that you also have the phenomena now that these people, I think, aren't waiting till they've killed 50 people to get that sort of record, that sort of medal of honor, 50 people, but they want to condense all that infamy with one spectacular, incredible, over-the-top, world attention-getting crime. It's amazing, this new phenomenon. That's what I think is happening.
Well, you may have a point there. In this new internet age, cell phone cameras, they can gain that infamy much quicker in today's times than they could in the 70s and 80s and 60s. So I think that many offenders and would-be offenders see that as a means to give them that infamy, at least for a time. They don't have to kill 10 people before they can begin to establish themselves in the public, the media's eyes. So that's frightening, and I hope that more social controls can be put in place that can keep people from acting out on their dark impulses?
Well, I think what we're going to do is just like the profile, and again, profiling, is, like they say, is only really a tool. I think what we're going to be able to say is that profiling always needs to be updated, and we're going to see a profile of a certain type of character. You know, the old stereotype of the serial killer kills animals or tortures animals when he's young might very well just have come from, 3 or 4 or 5 killers in the 70s and 80s who admitted that that's what they did. But when you're talking about, you may be having other factors involved, whether, people, we used to play and when we were young and there were squirrels and there was, we were in sort of a rural area. If a person grows up in a major metropolis, a major city, they might not even have access to those animals that they could readily torture. I think the profile has to be updated to take into consideration the new fascination with everyone being fascinated with celebrity. I mean, everybody's on a reality show or wants to be on one or wants to attend one, so we have that fascination with celebrity anyway. Narcissism, again, what's a narcissist? An actor who looks at himself for a living? What does narcissism and then what's malignant narcissism and how far can it go? And again, we can communicate with people in an instant, but we're more detached than probably ever in terms of we could be isolated with our own thoughts, with our own deviations, and who knows what people could plan and become in a short order. So I think those things can be a new profile from studying these people when you have the opportunity, if they're going to be forthright and be able to say, this is what I've done and this is why I did it. If we can do anything from these senseless crimes, is to try to make some sense and try to create a profile so that when we see this at a young age, I don't know, we can't lock up a person for their potential, but at least we can see it in its budding development possibly.
That's true, yes. And I also feel that one point you touched upon regarding celebrity and fame is that there are perhaps just as many people who are attracted to infamous individuals as those that are on the law-abiding side of celebrity. I mean, for example, you get Charles Manson. He probably gets more mail and attention than a lot of celebrities, actors, and athletes and such. And
sure.
Same is true for other killers, other people who do despicable things. There's a segment of the population that may be harboring dark thoughts themselves that are fascinated with these types of criminals that gives future criminals fuel for their own possible entry into criminality, because fame is something that crosses all sectors in today's society, and now that we have so many means to make people famous, like you said, these reality shows, including on channels like Investigation Discovery, they've got a lineup of true crime reality type shows 24/7, and so you are sort of feeding into the mentality of people who are able to look at these types of things not just for entertainment value, but because they are legitimately attracted to these types of criminals and the type of thoughts they may have for emulating them.
Well, that being said, but it's always a matter of which, the chicken or the egg. The thing is, it'd be like saying that if you reported on war, look what's happened. They keep happening. You see, So I think the thing is that it is history and it is news. It's how it's handled. For the very most part, true crime writers are at least sympathetic to the victim, whereas, certainly the courts might not be, and the media might not be, and they handle, I think, with real sensitivity, and they are also on the side of the law. Basically, police and prosecutors oftentimes cooperate and provide information, and people like yourself are in communication with police officers. So at least, there's a connection in terms of people are all on the same side in terms of this. In terms of if there were no true crime, would some villains not see their celebrity opportunity? But I mean, people were doing things before Jack the Ripper made the papers. So, like you say, in all throughout history, these people have done it without
True.
the allure of fame itself. So the thing is which one came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the crime came before true crime. So
right.
That's all I can say.
Yes, that is true. Yes, it seems like society just creates criminals irrespective of the conditions or variables that may be involved. I mean, you could make a strong case that in today's high-tech society, it has created a new breed of criminal that's influenced by the high-tech world and being on Facebook and YouTube and someone's cell phone camera. But at the same time, there were certainly a lot of killers and other violent offenders in the past that had none of the advantages of today's society and still were driven to commit crimes that, are in the history books today. So it's the reality is that we just live in a world where some people are going to do these things no matter what constraints you may put on them as a society or as individuals. I mean, I used to feel that if you had parents who brought you up the right way, paid attention to you when you were young and did everything, tried to live a law-abiding life to set an example for you, that you would follow suit, and, the parents who didn't do those things, their children were more likely to end up challenging authority and becoming deviant. But I now feel that it really comes down to the individual. You can have all the advantages in the world growing up, including wealth, and still end up being a killer or a serial killer, a mass murderer. It just comes down to the individual and their mentality and their influences and what they just sometimes, I suppose, substance abuse also can play a big role in many of these criminals and their being under the influence of one thing or another. But it comes down to the free will from top to bottom and what the person is willing to do. Even as senseless as a lot of these things seem to the average person, to the ones involved in these various crimes, they just are more driven by what they want to do at the moment or what they feel they will achieve from their acts, and then whatever the future holds, they'll just deal with it.
Yes, but, like just going back just a little bit, too, you said, well, people have this access to the Internet. The Internet now is just what major network television was when Manson put a swastika on his forehead and knew that the cameras were going to be there, and he was on Time magazine and, every newspaper and every magazine and every television screen. The Night Stalker did the same thing, Richard Ramirez. It's not to say that and Richard Ramirez is another person that was inundated with requests for marriage and correspondence from beautiful women, seemingly, credible people, not insane people, good-looking, attractive, well-heeled people. What you mentioned too is a very, very interesting part of the phenomena, which I will add to my repertoire in terms of trying to explain this new phenomena, is that there are all these followers for this Luca Magnata. There's 1,400 Facebook fans, and I've read the posts. There's guys pledging allegiance to Satan and saying what a great guy Luca Magnata is, and people want to have sex with him, people want to meet him. This new phenomena, too, that what you had mentioned, is these people that are in touch with their dark side. They're not afraid to go there. They want that as an experience, and we just don't know what that in touch with the dark side, willing to experiment with the dark side, what that really means. So you're seeing some, murders where teenagers are involved, and sure, the one teenager or two teenagers were involved in the actual act, but other people are indifferent to it even happening. So we're seeing sort of phenomena, I think, which is explained by what you said, that these people are in touch with their dark side, explore the dark side, and who knows what can happen as a result of that.
Right. Well, people like Magnata, the fact that he tortured animals prior to some of his other acts of murder and dismemberment and such, that's often a clue in and of itself. When you're willing to torture, kill animals, that's a good indicator that you're willing to do the same thing to humans. And so that's one thing that should be taken very seriously if people are doing these things, especially when they're young. It shouldn't be something that should be just blown off as, just some experimentation or something with no future implications.
Absolutely.
Killers out there, serial killers and other types as well, sexual killers, had their training with animals, unfortunately, and graduated to humans.
Well, there's some sort of desensitization that obviously goes on, some sort of, a will there to have no feelings towards, like we'll say, what a normal child would have is nothing but affection for a small, cuddly animal. But a person that's capable of torturing a cat and killing a cat and laughing about it, you would probably want to take notice of that individual. So.
Right. Yes. But it's really difficult to put the finger on something that can give us a surefire. I mean, that's a surefire indication as far as I'm concerned, anyone that would abuse animals, but as far as in general terms, being able to predict a killer or a rapist, apart from such things as being abused as a child, many rapists have been victims of child sexual molestation or physical
or so they claim.
violence.
So they all claim as well.
True,
so
yes, that's a good point. It seems like that's a defense that is too readily used by defense attorneys to try to mitigate the crimes.
Yeah, I always wonder that there must be something inherently. There's only one explanation when you say that the vast, that a rapist or someone convicted of sexual assault is most often have some evidence, or at least they claim to have been sexually abused. Now, if all or a small fraction of all the women who had been sexually assaulted or raped or molested were then to commit acts of sexual assault or rape or violence, we would have an epidemic of women molesting, assaulting, and raping children and girls and men. Yet
that's
we don't
true.
have
well,
that.
We would have an epidemic of males too. I mean, or much. If all the men who claim to have been sexually assaulted or victims of sexual abuse when they were young. You hear about these priests abusing children all the time. All the victims of this despicable behavior were to become sexual predators and murderers, then we lose all control. But the fact that the vast majority of people, irrespective of their history, whether they were victims of child abuse or not, or even abuse in adulthood, they still do not turn to crime. So it takes a certain trigger in a person to be willing to commit these various acts of violence and other forms of criminality. Every time I hear about a case where a husband has killed his wife, or wife has killed the husband, or boyfriend has killed his girlfriend, I mean, it's so senseless with all the people out there that are available for people to move on to, why so many people just cannot let go. Will not let go of the person. It's either, either I'm the only one for you, or there'll be no one else. I mean, it's frightening just how many of those types of cases are in the news on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
absolutely,
it's really sad that people are willing to take it to this extreme when you've got so many other opportunities. I'm sure you remember that old song, "Too Many Fish in the Sea," and that's true. That there are so many people lose perspective. A lot of killers lose their perspective entirely, and so they commit these types of domestic murders. And then, what do they get? They get arrested, and far more often than not, and then they're going to spend the rest of their life in prison or be on death row. So it's just frightening to think that we keep going through this cycle over and over, and we can't seem to break free of it in society. And that's cause of concern, because they're not building prisons fast enough to be able to hold the people that are doing these types of things, not to mention the other types of killers, the mass murderers, the serial killers, terrorist killers. It's just, it can be disillusioning, but at the same time, as a criminologist, I still feel that most people are basically good and are willing to stay on the right side of the law, even if they may have some impulses to step over the law, the line toward the dark side. They still are able to control it. But it's the fact that still even a small percentage of society that's unable to control it, that small percentage still adds up to a lot of people. A lot of people committing crimes of murder and sexual assaults, and the law enforcement is certainly stretched in this country, and so they can do their job and do it as well as they can, but it's like ants that are coming out of the ground. Someone steps on them, and then others just keep coming from cracks in the sidewalk. So that's unfortunately what law enforcement is up against in this day and age. They're locking up these offenders as fast as they can, but others keep taking their places, keep finding themselves motivated to commit these acts of violence that keeps people like me in business, since there's never a shortage of true crime cases that deserves to be shared with the public, because the public really, I think, true crime books certainly have a place in the scheme of things as far as writing is concerned, because people often wear blinders to some of the things that are really happening, and they need to know that these things are occurring, that there's fiction and there's real life. And true crime books, by and large, deal with real life crimes that are often far worse than the worst fiction crimes and killers. So
absolutely,
yes, we need to keep it going so people can recognize some of the signs, perhaps, of crime and criminals, and maybe be able to prevent that from happening to them or those that they love.
Yes.
In the future.
Well, we can only hope for the best, and
right.
In the meantime, we can capture it all and chronicle it all in books like this very one that we've been speaking about in the last hour or so. It's a Masters of True Crime, Chilling Stories of Murder and the Macabre, edited by journalist and author and criminologist R.Barri Flowers. So thank you very much for coming on the program, Barry. I just wanted to mention as well, because I am a celebrity-obsessed person myself, I just wanted to mention I was very thrilled to have my name on the back of the book here, and I'll just read what it has for those that might be interested to listen to the program tonight. Incredible cases, psychopathic killers, unwitting victims, along with the very best writers, make for an exciting, no-holds-barred, soon-to-be true crime classic. And that's Dan Zupansky, host of True Murder. So thank you very much for including that, Barry. That was a big thrill seeing my name in print there. And thank you very much for coming on and talking about Masters of True Crime. 17 of the biggest, most important, and best true crime writers in the world, including R.Barri Flowers, Masters of True Crime. It's a great book, and it's Prometheus Books, but I'm sure that it's available. Tell us, it's available in ebook, in paperback, and
it's available in trade paperback at the moment, both online and in your local booksellers. But it will be available in ebook and audio in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out on it in Amazon and iTunes and Barnes & Noble, etc., and Audible. Because it's some fascinating stories, and we want it to be available in any format that one chooses to listen or read it.
That's great. Yeah, that's really good, because you don't see a lot of in the last couple of years since ebook has come out. You haven't seen too many releases of audiobooks, and I know that that was a big growing audience as well. Was the audiobook for people who are traveling long distance, and it's very similar to the people that are downloading this program on iTunes and listening to it at their convenience too. So it's good to have radio where people can just listen and to the details of the crimes and the stories itself. I think it makes for fascinating listening. So thank you very much, Barry, for coming on the program and talking about Masters of True Crime. You have yourself a great evening, and I'm sure with your prolific pace of writing books and putting them together and doing all kinds of projects that we'll be talking to you again real soon.
I look forward to that, Dan, and thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much. You have a great night, Barry.
Okay, same
to
you.
Good night.
Bye.